Weddings are meant to be joyous occasions, the culmination of love, the beginning of a new chapter. And for shifters like Sylvie, weddings hold an even deeper significance. Beyond the ceremony and celebration lies the sacred mating ritual, the formation of a bond that transcends the physical, connecting two souls for life. What Sylvie hadn't anticipated was how quickly joy could turn to ashes. She never imagined that on this day. Of all days, she would suddenly gain the ability to hear others' thoughts, and she certainly never expected her fiancé's mind to be filled with longing, not for her, but for her beautiful younger sister. But Sylvie didn't know any of this yet, as she stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching Edmund guide Elaine through an elegant turn. As her sister and fiancé smiled radiantly at each other, all Sylvie saw was how sweet it was of Edmund to chaperone her little sister, making sure she felt welcome at the Alpha King's court. The grand ballroom of the palace was a marvel of crystal and marble. Nobility from 3 kingdoms mingling beneath glittering chandeliers for this year's mating ceremony. "What a striking couple they make," an older noblewoman said, watching Edmund and Elaine. "Are they to be mated tonight as well?" Sylvie laughed. "Not at all, madam, for Lord Edmund is my fiancé. You see," the woman raised an eyebrow, but Sylvie paid her no mind. It warmed her heart to see the 2 most important people in her life getting along so well. Edmund would make such a wonderful brother to Elaine once they were mated, the way he leaned down to whisper something that made Elaine laugh and blush. Naturally, the court would assume things about their already special bond. However, it wasn't the lovely Elaine, but the quiet and reserved Sylvie whom Edmund had chosen to court. The thought sent a pleasant flutter through her stomach. In just 1 hour, Edmund would take her as his mate in front of the entire court, their union blessed by the Alpha King himself, for now. The king remained at distance, watching his own ball from his throne at the end of the hall, and it was impossible to say whether he enjoyed himself or not, for his face was kept hidden behind a silver mask. Apparently, he wore it at all public functions. Some said it was ancient tradition. Others whispered it was for his protection. The more salacious gossip suggested he was hideously disfigured. No matter. By becoming Edmund's mate, this masked man would soon be Sylvie's new king. Though leaving her homeland had been difficult, there was nothing left for her there since both her parents had passed. Her future lay here, in this new kingdom with Edmund. "I didn't realize you were such an accomplished dancer." Sylvie smiled as they approached. "Only with the right partner," he replied, making Elaine's cheek flush. Sylvie watched their eyes meet and linger a moment too long. Perhaps, but no, she was imagining things. "Would you excuse me a moment?" Sylvie said after a beat. "I need some air. It's getting rather warm." She made her way toward one of the side doors that led to the garden terrace, feeling silly. So what if Edmund and Elaine got along, if Edmund's heart had been set on her sister? Then he'd have asked her to be his mate, not Sylvie. A commotion across the ballroom drew her attention. 2 guards had apprehended a hooded figure in worn, patched clothing. Commoners were permitted to observe noble mating ceremonies from the gallery above, but apparently not those quite so poorly dressed. As she approached the doorway, Sylvie paused to let them pass. "Pardon the disturbance, my lady." The taller guard nodded to Sylvie. "We'll have this vagrant removed immediately." "I'm no vagrant," the hooded man protested. The second guard scoffed, giving him a push which caused the man to stumble sideways, directly into Sylvie. His shoulder collided hard with hers, and his hand shot out to steady Sylvie, catching her bare arm. A jolt of energy passed between them, and for a brief, disorienting moment, the room seemed to spin around her, sounds fading in and out as though she were underwater. "My sincerest apologies," the man said quietly, still holding her arm. "Unhand the lady at once," the first guard barked. "I'm fine," Sylvie assured them. "We'll see him out, my lady," the guard insisted, dragging the hooded man through the doorway. Sylvie watched them disappear into the garden, confused. What had just happened? "Sylvie, are you all right?" Elaine rushed to her side. Sylvie shook her head, still feeling oddly lightheaded. "I'm fine," she assured her, straightening her gown. "Just a bit dizzy." Edmund joined them, his expression darkening. Commoners should know their place, especially on ceremonial occasions. "It was an accident," Sylvie said, surprised by her own defensiveness. "Let's forget about it." Edmund placed a protective hand on her back. "Perhaps you should sit down for a moment. You still look pale." Sylvie smiled up at him, the momentary discomfort beginning to fade. In just 1 hour, they would be bound together forever. Now, only one trouble remained: making sure Elaine wouldn't have to go back home. "Sister," Sylvie said, "did any young suitors ask for your hand while I wasn't watching?" Elaine shook her head. "We're here for you, Sylvie, not for me." "Well, why can't it be both?" Sylvie reached out to adjust a strand of Elaine's hair. "You look absolutely lovely tonight. Who knows, you might even attract the eye of the Alpha King himself." As her fingers brushed against Elaine's temple, her voice suddenly rang out, clear as a bell, yet somehow distant and echoing. "She's mocking me," Elaine's voice said. "Always so superior. Always the perfect heiress." Sylvie jerked her hand back. Superior. When had she ever acted superior to her sister? "Of course I'm not mocking you." "Elaine," she protested, taken aback. She'd always treated her younger sister with nothing but love. She'd had no idea Elaine harbored such resentment. "Elaine? You're beautiful and kind. Truly. Any man would be fortunate to have you. Even a king." Sylvie insisted. "I don't understand why you'd think I'm being superior." She was hoping her sister would explain herself, but instead of the contrite explanation Sylvie anticipated, Elaine's expression morphed to utter confusion. "Pardon?" She asked. "I didn't say anything about you mocking me." "Sylvie!" Sylvie searched her sister's face for any sign of deception. She found only genuine bewilderment. "But you just..." Sylvie faltered. "I clearly heard you say I was being superior. I didn't say anything like that." Elaine's eyes widened. "Sylvie, are you feeling all right?" Sylvie bit her lip. Had she imagined it, Edmund placed a steadying hand on her back. "Perhaps the excitement is getting to you. My dear, would you like some air?" Sylvie stared at her sister, utterly confused. She'd heard the words so clearly. Elaine's voice, Elaine's tone. "Yes," she managed finally. "Some air would be nice." "I'll fetch you some water," Elaine offered. As she turned to go, her fingers brushed against Sylvie's wrist. "You won't be so high and mighty when Edmund leaves you," Elaine's voice said with sudden venom. "This time." Sylvie was looking directly at her sister. Elaine's lips hadn't moved, yet her voice had been crystal clear, though strangely hollow, as though spoken from inside a cave. "What did you say?" Sylvie gasped, flinching away. Elaine stepped back, genuine alarm on her face now. "Sylvie, I didn't say anything. You're worrying me." "I heard you," Sylvie insisted, her heart racing. "Something about Edmund. I haven't said a word." Elaine's voice rose in pitch, while Edmund's brow furrowed with concern. "Sylvie, darling, what's troubling you?" His hand moved to cup her cheek in a comforting gesture, the moment his skin touched hers. That strange jolt returned. And then, Edmund's voice filled her head, echoing strangely as his lips remained still. "What nonsense is this now?" she heard him say. "I've come too far to have Sylvie doubting at the last moment. Just a few more hours and her fortune will be mine." Sylvie stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. "My love." "What's wrong?" Edmund reached for her again, his expression concerned, while his voice magically rang inside Sylvie's head once more. If only Elaine had been named in the will, as is her due. She heard. I wouldn't need to claim this foolish girl. Sylvie recoiled from his touch. She hadn't known Elaine had not been named in their father's will. But right now her main focus was Edmund, "How could you?" she cried, backing away from him. "I heard you. I know how you really feel." Edmund's face hardened. "You're speaking nonsense. Come, the ceremony will begin soon." "No." Sylvie shook her head. "The ceremony is off. I won't be mated to someone who only wants my inheritance. Someone who's in love with my—" Edmund grabbed her arm. "Lower your voice," he hissed. "You're making a scene over nothing." But his thoughts hammered into her mind. "If she ruins this now, Father's creditors will take everything. I need her fortune to save the estate." "Let me go," Sylvie demanded, trying to pull away. They had reached the edge of the ballroom, near a side entrance to the gardens, where the beggar from Earlieser now sat on the steps, apparently having evaded the guards. "You're being hysterical," Edmund said. "What is wrong with you? Sylvie." When we're mated, Sylvie repeated, incredulous. "We will not be mated." "Edmund, it's a little too late for that. Don't you think?" he asked lowly. "The king himself is prepared to bless our union." Sylvie stomped her foot. "I'd rather mate with that beggar over there," she declared, pointing to him, "than spend another moment with you." Edmund's facade cracked. "Is that so?" His voice rose. "Perhaps we should ask him if he'd have you." Humiliation burned through Sylvie. Without thinking, she wrenched free of Edmund's grip and strode toward the beggar. And then Sylvie did the only thing she could think of to prove her point. She seized the front of his worn cloak and pressed her lips to his. She braced herself to hear his thoughts, too, expected shock or confusion to flood her mind as it had with the others. Instead, there was nothing but silence and the unexpected softness of his lips against hers. When she pulled away, she found herself staring into those same striking gray eyes she'd glimpsed earlier, now watching her with equal parts surprise and— was that amusement? Edmund's hand closed around her arm again, yanking her backward. "You want to humble me with your little display," he snarled. "Now you'll face the consequences." He began dragging her back toward the ballroom, gesturing sharply for the beggar to follow. "Come along, then. Let's see what the Alpha King has to say about this spectacle." Chapter 1. Edmund dragged Sylvie through the crowd as whispers rose like a wave as they passed. Ladies hiding smirks, gentlemen clearing throats. "Make way," Edmund commanded. The Alpha King must hear of this disgrace. Sylvie's cheeks burned with humiliation, but her spine remained straight. At least now she knew the truth about the man she'd nearly bound herself to for eternity. The crowd parted, revealing King Caspian sitting upon his ornate throne. His ceremonial mask, crafted to resemble a wolf's visage, caught the light as he turned toward the commotion. "Your Majesty," Edmund called, executing a perfect bow. "I beg your intervention in a matter of honor." The king tilted his head slightly. "Speak, Lord Edmund. This woman," Edmund gestured to Sylvie, "was to be my mate this very night. Yet, moments ago, I discovered her in a most compromising position with this vagrant." He jerked his chin toward the beggar and added, "She has dishonored our betrothal before the ceremony even began." Gasps rippled through the assembly. "Is this true?" the king asked. Before she could respond, Edmund spoke again. "I demand justice according to the old laws," he declared. "If a betrothed person betrays their intended, they must choose. Either honor the original commitment or bind themselves to the one they chose to betray with." Sylvie's eyes widened. She hadn't known of this law. "Indeed," the king said. "Lady Sylvie, will you honor your betrothal to Lord Edmund, or will you bind yourself to this man?" He gestured toward the beggar. Edmund stepped back with a triumphant smile, and Sylvie suddenly understood his strategy. He believed she would never choose a life of poverty and disgrace, that when faced with the alternative, she would meekly accept him as her mate, inheritance and all. Her gaze traveled between Edmund, with his golden hair and fine clothes, and the tall stranger beside him, wrapped in a patched cloak. "I choose the beggar," Sylvie announced confidently, despite the collective gasp that followed. Edmund's face contorted with shock. "You don't mean to choose a beggar over me," he protested. "Oh, but I do." "The beggar it is," Sylvie snapped. "The beggar has a name." The hooded man interrupted. "Yes, of course." Sylvie nodded. "I'll happily marry." "Reeve," the man supplied, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Reeve," Sylvie repeated firmly, instead of Edmund. "That's fine by me." As the crowd erupted in scandalized chatter, the king raised a hand, silencing the uproar. "And you, sir, do you consent to this binding? The beggar?" Reeve glanced at Sylvie. "Yes," he said finally. "I consent, Your Highness." Sylvie noticed the slight tilt of the royal head, as though in confusion. "Are you certain?" the king asked. "Quite certain, Your Highness," Reeve insisted. The king remained still for another moment, then nodded. "So be it. The mating ceremony will proceed starting with a different pairing than anticipated." He gestured to the priest. "Father, you may begin." Edmund's face had gone pale with fury. "This is madness," he hissed. "You would throw away everything for this? This gutter rat, better a rat than a snake," Sylvie replied. The priest approached with visible reluctance. When he placed his hands on their shoulders to begin the blessing, his thoughts flooded Sylvie's mind. The poor girl is throwing her life away. And for what? To mate with a beggar so filthy he'll probably give her fleas. Sylvie flinched, but held firm as the priest intoned the ancient words of the mating ritual. "The mating bond requires an exchange of blood," the priest finally announced. "The beggar will bite first, followed by his mate." Reeve stepped closer to Sylvie. "Are you certain?" he asked. She nodded, exposing her neck. She would not mate with Edmund. Of that she was certain. As he moved closer, the hood of his cloak fell back completely, and Sylvie caught her first proper look at the man she was about to bind herself to for life. The collective gasp from the crowd confirmed she wasn't imagining what she saw. Far from the dirty vagrant she'd expected, Reeve was strikingly handsome. His face was all sharp angles and perfect symmetry. High cheekbones, a strong jaw dusted with the shadow of a beard, and full lips. "Perhaps being a beggar's bride won't be such a hardship after all," a noblewoman nearby whispered audibly. Sylvie's cheeks flushed at the implication. She braced herself, expecting his bite to be rough. Instead, his hands were gentle, and his lips brushed her skin first before his teeth broke the surface of her neck. When it was her turn. Sylvie leaned forward to complete the bond. Beneath the worn collar of his cloak, Reeve's skin was unexpectedly clean, his scent pleasant. Like pine and night air, her teeth broke his skin, and the connection strengthened instantly. But as Sylvie waited for the rush of his thoughts to invade her mind, nothing came. "It is done," the priest proclaimed, before the eyes of the court and the blessing of the Alpha King. "You are now mated." Chapter 2. The night air bit through Sylvie's ceremonial gown as she followed Reeve along a narrow forest path. They had left the palace with nothing but the clothes on their backs, her in silk that snagged on every branch, him in his worn cloak that he'd draped over her shoulders when he noticed her shivering. The simple kindness had made her heart flutter unexpectedly. In truth, she owed him far more than thanks. This stranger had saved her from a lifetime bound to Edmund's deceit. Before departing, she had managed one crucial task. She'd spotted her father's old steward, Giles, among the spectators, and pulled him aside. "Take this letter to Master Pharaoh," she had whispered. "My financial advisor. Tell no one." The old man had nodded, tucking the message into his vest. "Will you be safe, my lady?" "Just deliver it," she'd replied. And quickly, in the letter, she'd instructed Master Pharaoh to confirm two things: whether her mating to Reeve affected her inheritance, and if Elaine truly had been excluded from their father's will. She'd also made him a request, to lie if anyone inquired about her financial status. to claim she couldn't access her fortune. Edmund would never stop pursuing her otherwise. Now, trudging through the darkened forest after a man she'd known for mere hours, Sylvie felt a curious mixture of fear and hope. The mating bond pulsed between them, a constant reminder that there was no going back. Whatever awaited her at the end of this path was her new life. Each time Reeve turned to make sure she was keeping pace, the moonlight caught his gray eyes. And Sylvie felt a little thrill run through her. Maybe this hasty union could become something genuine. "It's not much further," he said, his voice the only warm thing in the chill night. "Just beyond this clearing." The trees opened to reveal a small cabin nestled against the hillside. In the moonlight, Sylvie could make out its weathered planks and sagging porch. As they drew closer, she noticed holes in the thatch roof. "Welcome home," Reeve said, pushing the door open. The cabin's interior was a single room containing a rough-hewn table with one chair, a small fireplace with a few logs stacked beside it, and a narrow cot pushed against the far wall. Nothing more. "I apologize for it not being much," Reeve said, watching her face carefully. "Probably far from what a noble lady requires." His stance was tense, almost expectant, as his gray eyes remained fixed on her face, studying her reaction with unusual intensity. A terrible realization then hit Sylvie. "He accepted my hand because he thinks I'm wealthy," she thought. "He's waiting to see if I'll reveal my true colors now that we're stuck here." The thought stung more than it should have. She'd begun to imagine that perhaps he'd helped her because he'd felt some of the same inexplicable connection she had. But no. Like Edmund, he saw her as nothing more than a path to fortune. Disappointment hardened into resolve. She would not be used again. "Actually, kind sir," she said, "I should inform you that I'm no longer a noble woman. I cannot inherit unless I marry a man of noble birth, so I'm afraid I've lost all my fortune by choosing you." She watched his face carefully, looking for the telltale signs of disappointment or anger that would confirm her suspicions. "Is that so?" Reeve's eyebrows rose in curiosity. "Then why didn't you marry a man of noble birth?" He didn't believe her. Sylvie realized he thought this was some kind of test or trick. "Unlike you, dear husband, my fiancé was only after my inheritance," she replied, studying his reaction. Reeve's eyes narrowed slightly, searching her face. "I see." He leaned against the table. "So I suppose you'll be asking for a separation to get your money back." A muscle twitched in his jaw as he waited for her answer, and Sylvie's heart sank further. "He wants me gone," she thought. "He was hoping to take my money, but now that I don't have any, he wants me to leave. Well, if he wanted to be rid of her, he'd have to say it directly. She wouldn't make it easy for him, because by failing to honor her betrayal, she'd be expected to go back to Edmund, and she'd rather sleep in the forest first. That was never my intention," she said, squaring her shoulders. "Though perhaps you will ask for a separation, upon finding out I am poor." "Not at all." "Dear wife," his lips quirked into a half-smile. "But as you can see, my roof is full of holes. There's not much to eat, and I have barely enough wood to last us the night." He trailed off expectantly, and Sylvie nearly laughed at how transparent he was, trying to scare her into admitting she had money hidden away. "I'm sure with my assistance we will manage," she replied with a bright, brittle smile. Reeve tilted his head. "Do you know how to fix roofs and chop wood?" he challenged. "I can certainly learn," Sylvie snapped. They stared at each other, and the mating bond pulsed between them, at odds with the mutual wariness. Finally, Reeve shook his head, and moved to start a fire in the hearth. Once the flames caught, he straightened and deliberately approached her. "You must be cold," he said, reaching for her hand with clear intent. Sylvie hesitated before allowing him the contact. The moment their skin touched, the mating bond flared like a banked fire suddenly stirred to life. Though she still couldn't hear his thoughts, she sensed emotions, weariness, curiosity, and something like grudging admiration. Reeves' reaction was more dramatic. His eyes widened in genuine shock, his lips parting slightly as he stared at their joined hands. "Do you have magic?" he asked abruptly. What? Sylvie blinked. "Confused. Magic," he repeated, other than the obvious ability to shift. The specificity of the question caught her off guard. "Why?" she asked suspiciously. "Were you hoping I'd magically make your problems go away?" "No, of course not," Reeves said, perplexed. Sylvie crossed her arms. It shouldn't matter if he wanted her money. She hadn't married him for love either. Yet, somehow, the thought of him having an ulterior motive stung. She'd wanted, foolishly perhaps, for at least one person in this new kingdom to accept her for herself. "Good," she said firmly, "because we're mated now, so I'm not going anywhere." "Fine," he said after a moment, "but don't expect to live here for free. If I have 2 mouths to feed, I expect you to pitch in." "Fine," she shot back, "but don't expect me to share your bed. It's too small. I'm taking it." "Fine." His jaw clenched. "Great." She lifted her chin. They stood facing each other, arms crossed, identical challenging gleams in their eyes. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the tension between them. Chapter 3. A month after her impulsive wedding, Sylvie found herself knee-deep in mud, scrubbing the inside of Farmer Mercer's pig pen. The burly farmer had offered them 3 copper coins, an opportunity Sylvie couldn't refuse. "That spot's been clean for 10 minutes, he called from the fence. "You're just pushing mud around now." "Girl," Sylvie blinked, realizing the farmer was right. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, struggling to her feet. "First time cleaning a pig pen?" Mercer asked, not unkindly. Sylvie tried to smile, grateful for his lack of judgment. But then, as he extended his hand to help her out of the enclosure, their fingers briefly touched, and immediately, his thoughts invaded her mind. Look at her, soft as butter and twice as useless. Probably some lord's runaway plaything. She jerked her hand away. This was the curse of her new ability, hearing the unfiltered judgments people kept hidden behind polite faces. The only mind closed to her was Reeves, a fact that both frustrated and relieved her. Sylvie began the long walk home, her coarse linen dress caked with mud and worse. By the time she reached their cabin, the sun was setting. Inside. Reeve was whittling by the fire, his knife moving with practiced precision over a piece of wood. "Productive day," he asked, setting aside his project. 3 copper coins and vegetables," she replied. "And you 1 silver piece and a side of bacon." She nodded, too tired to speak further. Every day was the same, an endless cycle of hard labor for meager rewards, and yet she refused to admit how much she struggled. To do so would be to give Reeve the opening to tap into her fortune. No better, he thought. She was as poor as he did now. "The roof still needs patching before the rain comes," he said casually. Sylvie stared at him in disbelief. "The roof? I've been cleaning pig filth since dawn," she protested. "Do you prefer to sleep under the rain again?" Reeve asked, watching her reaction carefully. She knew what he was doing. Always testing, waiting for her to admit defeat and confess to having the means to hire someone else. "Fine," she said sweetly. "But while I'm doing that, perhaps you could finally fix that table that wobbles every time we eat, and the door that sticks. Oh, and we need more firewood." A spark of amusement flashed in his eyes. "Anything else, my lady?" "Actually, yes. We need clean water from the well." He bowed mockingly. "As you wish." By late afternoon the next day, Sylvie was perched precariously on the edge of their cabin's roof, hammering reeds into place to patch the worst of the holes. The autumn wind had picked up, making her already precarious position more dangerous. Eventually, her foot slipped completely on the damp thatch, and she slid several feet before frantically clawing at the edge. Suddenly, strong hands gripped her calves, steadying her. "I've got you." Reeves' voice came from below, surprisingly urgent. She froze, heart hammering in her chest, as he climbed the ladder one-handed, still maintaining his grip on her. "I told you to be careful," he said. "I had it under control." She lied. "You were about to control yourself right off the roof." He withdrew his arm slowly before adding, "Perhaps we should finish this together." The unexpected concession left her momentarily speechless, but before she could respond, the palace guard startled them both. He stood on their threshold, his uniform immaculate against the rustic surroundings. "You're needed at the palace," he said to Reeve without preamble. "Tomorrow at dawn?" Sylvie frowned in confusion, but Reeve's expression revealed nothing. For what purpose, he asked. "The steward didn't say. Only that your skills are required." After a moment's hesitation, Reeve nodded and the guard departed without further explanation. "The palace?" Sylvie asked. "What business do you have there? I don't know." Reeve replied, "This is the first I've heard of it." His evasiveness only heightened her suspicion. "I'll need to leave before dawn," he continued, changing the subject. "While I'm gone, see if you can trade some of those vegetables for salt." "Fine," she agreed reluctantly. Sylvie's days fell into a grueling pattern. She worked for neighboring farms and households, doing whatever tasks would earn them food or coin. Meanwhile, Reeve's visits to the palace became regular over the following weeks. 3 weeks after his first summons to the palace, Sylvie woke to an empty cabin, the mating bond feeling strangely taut with his absence. Each time he left, the sensation grew stronger, a physical pull that left her restless and irritable until his return. She spent the day struggling with the garden, fighting stubborn soil and her own inexperience. As the sun began to set with no sign of Reeve, the mating bond's pull intensified from discomfort to something closer to pain. She paced the small cabin, unable to focus on any task, her skin hypersensitive, as though anticipating a touch that wouldn't come. "You're late," she said, when he finally returned long after dark, the relief immediate and overwhelming. Reeve looked exhausted, but he carried a larger purse than usual, which he placed on the table. "For household expenses," he said. She stared at the coins. "What are you really doing at the palace?" "Reeve. Does it matter?" A shadow crossed his face. "The money keeps us fed." "It matters if you're doing something illegal," she countered. "Or dangerous." "It's neither," he assured her, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't being entirely truthful. Before she could press further, he swayed slightly, catching himself on the table's edge. "You're exhausted," she observed, momentarily setting aside her suspicions. "When did you last eat yesterday?" He admitted. She guided him to sit, the brief contact sending warmth flowing through their bond. They ate in silence, the unspoken awareness of its need hanging between them. That night, as they lay 6 feet apart, Sylvie found herself hyper-aware of every movement, every breath from across the room. The bond hummed between them, unsatisfied and insistent. She wondered if he felt it too, this growing need for contact. Just as she was finally drifting to sleep, his voice came softly through the darkness. "Tomorrow I'll help you with the garden." It wasn't an apology, but it was something close. "Thank you," she replied, equally soft. Another silence. Then, "The palace will require me 3 days a week from now on." The bond twinged at the news, a physical manifestation of her unspoken concerns. More absences, more secrets. "I see," was all she said, though her mind raced with questions she knew he wouldn't answer. Chapter 4. Sylvie sat by the window, her eyes fixed on the path that cut through the trees. Reeve should have been home hours ago. His visits to the palace had increased from 3 days a week to 5, sometimes overnight, and the growing distance between them only seemed to intensify the bond's pull. When Reeve's tall figure finally emerged from the dark forest, relief hit her so hard her knees nearly buckled. "You're late," she said as the door creaked open. She risked a glance and regretted it instantly. His hair was damp with snow, his jaw shadowed with stubble. His eyes, God, those eyes, dark with something she shouldn't name. "Have you eaten?" she asked. "At the palace." His voice came low, strained. He didn't sit. He lingered, taut as a bowstring. The silence stretched, oppressive. "I fixed another leak in the roof," she blurted, her throat dry. "Thank you." His answer was soft, but the muscle ticking in his jaw betrayed his tension. The bond pulled at her like a tether. Her body ached for contact. "Could you help me with something?" she asked, her voice breathier than she intended. His eyes snapped to hers, sharp and intent. "The hook's on my dress," she said, gesturing to her back. "I can't reach them." The air grew hot, stifling. His silence lasted a beat too long before he nodded. "Turn around," she obeyed, her pulse skittering. The first brush of his fingers at her nape made her shiver. The hooks came undone one by one, each touch maddeningly careful, his knuckles grazing bare skin. She bit her lip to stifle a sound, tilting imperceptibly back against him. "Your scent," he murmured, voice hoarse. He said nothing more, but his breath shifted, and she realized he was leaning closer, drinking her in. Her eyes fluttered shut. For a heartbeat, she thought he'd give in, sink his teeth into her skin like the bond demanded. Instead, with a ragged breath, he forced the last hook loose. "All done," he murmured. She turned slowly, her loosened dress slipping scandalously off one shoulder. His gaze dropped to the exposed skin, his nostrils flaring. "Anything else you need?" he asked. They stood caught in a terrible standoff, the bond thrumming between them like a drumbeat. "No," she murmured, waiting for him to say something. Frustration flickered across his features before he tore his gaze away. "All right, I'll go check the wood pile," he said, and then he was gone, the cold air rushing in again as the door slammed. The next morning, Sylvie woke to an empty cabin yet again. The bond's discomfort was immediate and insistent, a hollow feeling beneath her breastbone that grew more pronounced with each passing hour. By midday, her skin felt too tight, her nerves too raw, and by evening she was pacing the small cabin, unable to settle to any task. That night, she found herself lying in his bed instead of her own, face pressed into his pillow, breathing in his scent. It only made the ache worse. The following day, he still hadn't returned, and she ventured into the village for supplies, hoping human contact might distract her. At the market, she overheard a villager speaking with several men, their voices grave. 3 travelers attacked already, someone said. King's offering a substantial bounty to whoever can drive off the rogues. "Rogue shifters, they say," another man added, coming down from the northern hills. The rest of Sylvie's trip to the village proved even more unpleasant, accidental touches that sent unwanted thoughts flooding into her mind. By the time she returned to the cabin, her head throbbed and her patience had worn dangerously thin. When Reeve finally returned that evening, she was at the breaking point. He looked worse than she felt, haggard, eyes bloodshot, his movements stiff as though he were in pain. Neither spoke immediately. They circled each other warily, like animals unsure whether to fight or flee. "You were gone longer than expected," she finally said, the accusation thinly veiled. "Yes." His voice was hoarse, his eyes never leaving her as he added, "Did you miss me?" "Hardly noticed you were gone." Sylvie lied, even as the bond hummed between them, betraying her words. The tension was unbearable, the air thick with unspoken need. Reeve stood too close and not close enough, his scent enveloping her, making it difficult to think clearly. "Perhaps," he said abruptly, his voice strained, "you could go gather firewood. The pile is getting low." Something in her snapped. 3 days of the bond's torment, of missing him despite herself, of wondering where he went and what he did, and now this again, giving her tasks to taunt her. "Right," she said, "and perhaps you should try earning that bounty being offered for rogues in the northern hills." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Where did you hear about that at the village today?" She met his eyes. "This place is running ragged, and your work at the palace, whatever it is, isn't helping." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by disbelief. "You want me to hunt them?" he asked. "The rogues." "Why not?" Sylvie snapped. "We could use the coins. And since you're so eager to be away from here." She let the implication hang. "So that's what you want." "Sylvie," he asked, his voice low and intense. "For me to leave." The words stuck in her throat. "No," she wanted to say. "What I want is for you to choose me. To love me. For me, not for my fortune." But the memory of all the things she heard people think of her on a daily basis made her feel insecure. And so, instead, she said, "What I want doesn't seem to matter much to you, does it? You come and go as you please." He stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then, without a word, he turned and began gathering his things. A flutter of panic rose in her chest. Now she hadn't expected him to acquiesce so readily. "But you've only just returned." "Reeve," he paused at the door, finally meeting her eyes. "I'll bring back your bounty," he said. "You'll see. At least take others with you," Sylvie called after him. Pain blossomed in her chest as the door closed behind him. She sank to the floor, wondering how their dance of challenge and counter-challenge had spiraled so disastrously out of control. Chapter 5. 4 days, and Reeve had yet to return. Sylvie alternated between pacing the cabin and walking the path to the village, hoping for news. The bond had moved beyond pain into a dull, constant ache that made it difficult to eat or sleep. Today, the market was unusually quiet, the normal bustle subdued by something she couldn't name. She approached the baker first, forcing a casual smile. "Any news from the north about the rogues?" The man's face darkened. "Bad business. That found a traveler yesterday morning, torn to pieces." Poor soul. The blood drained from Sylvie's face, where she managed, barely able to form the word, northern crossroads by the old oak. "Exactly where those rogues were last seen." He shook his head sadly. "Tall fellow. They said dark hair. Couldn't identify much else. Given the state of him, tall, dark-haired." Her legs gave way beneath her, and she would have collapsed if not for the baker's steadying hand on her arm. His thoughts invaded her mind immediately. Poor thing. Must be her husband. They found... "No," she whispered, pulling away from his touch. The world tilted sideways, colors bleeding together. She didn't remember walking home. One moment she was in the village. The next she was stumbling through their door, collapsing beside the cold hearth. Her hands moved mechanically, building a fire she couldn't feel. Her body going through motions, while her mind circled one terrible truth. Reeve was dead. She had sent him to his death. "You stubborn, impossible man," she whispered to the empty room. "Why did you have to prove yourself? Why couldn't you have stayed?" The questions hung in the air, unanswered. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly as the truth she'd been fighting finally broke through. She loved him, not just desired him, not just needed him for the bond, not just appreciated his presence. She loved his quiet strength, the gentleness in hands capable of such power. She loved how he challenged her, matched her stubborn for stubborn. She loved the rare smiles that transformed his face, the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. And she had sent him to his death with cruel words and wounded pride. A sob tore from her throat, raw and broken. So what if he'd married her for her money? She'd been poor for 3 months and found it incredibly difficult. Reeve had been poor his entire life. Naturally, he longed for a better future. The sound of the door latch lifting barely registered through her grief. The rush of cold air from outside went unnoticed. It was only when a shadow fell across her that Sylvie looked up, not daring to believe what her senses told her. Reeve stood in the doorway, haggard but very much alive. Blood stained his shirt. A fresh cut marked his cheek. But he was there. For a moment, she thought she'd conjured him from pure longing, a phantom born of desperation and grief. But phantoms didn't bleed. "I got your bounty," he said, tossing a small pouch onto the table. "What are you doing on the... Are you crying?" The question, so mundane after the hell she'd endured, broke something loose inside her. "You idiot," she finally managed, her voice hoarse from crying. "I thought you were dead." Confusion crossed his face. "Dead?" he asked. "Why?" "Because it's been 4 days," she cried, rising to her feet, "and there was a man killed by wolves at the northern crossroads." His eyes widened slightly. "Well, that wasn't me," he explained, quite uselessly. "Obviously." Sylvie screamed, relief giving way to anger. "But how was I supposed to know that you just left?" "Because you asked me to," he reminded her. "I didn't think you'd actually go." Sylvie snapped. Reeve blinked. He took a step toward her, then another, his movements cautious. "You were worried about me," he observed. "Well, of course I was." Her voice broke, and with it, the last of Reeve's restraint. His eyes darkened, pupils swallowing the gray, his wolf rising to the surface. "Sylvie," he said, her name low and rough, like gravel dragged across her skin. That was all. One word and she shattered. Their bodies collided, his mouth crushed against hers, wild and unrestrained, and the bond surged, vicious and sweet. A flood of heat that made her moan into his kiss. Her hands clawed at him, desperate to prove he was real. His shirt tore beneath her fingers, and he groaned as though the sound of fabric ripping was too much to bear. He lifted her easily, her legs wrapping around his waist, her back pressing to the wall before she even realized they had moved. "Tell me to stop," he ground out against her throat. "I'll stop if you..." "Don't you dare!" she gasped, dragging him back. The kiss was endless, brutal with need, until he carried her to the bed, for one suspended heartbeat. Their eyes met, his dark and starving, but vulnerable too, almost reverent. Then thought dissolved. Words became meaningless. His mouth claimed hers again, and the rest was heat and pressure. Fabric tearing, skin against skin. The bond wrapped tight around them, electric and merciless, amplifying every touch. When they finally came together, it was with the force of inevitability, the breaking of a storm that had threatened for far too long. It was consuming and raw, their wolves howling through the bond, their bodies moving as one. Later there would be words, later confessions, but not now. Now there was only this, his body tangled with hers, the bond blazing, and the truth neither of them could deny anymore, that they needed each other. Chapter 6. 3 days had passed in a blissful haze. Sylvie lay tangled in the bedsheets, Reeve's arm draped possessively across her waist, his breath warm against her neck. "We should probably get up," she murmured. Reeve's response was to pull her closer. "Why?" he asked, voice still rough with sleep. "With that bounty you made me get. We don't need to work for at least another month," she laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "You plan to keep me here indefinitely?" "Why not? It's a good plan." His fingers traced lazy patterns along her spine. The best I've had in years. In fact, the bond hummed contentedly between them, warm and vibrant. Through it, she could sense his happiness, his satisfaction, emotions that mirrored her own so perfectly, it was sometimes difficult to tell where her feelings ended and his began. "You're happy," she said, touching his face wonderingly. His eyes softened as he caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Did you doubt it before she could respond? A sharp knock at the door interrupted them, making Reeve groan. "Ignore it," he said, burying his face in her hair. "They'll go away." The knocking came again, more insistent this time, followed by a stern voice. "Open up, beggar!" "You were expected at the palace yesterday." Sylvie stiffened, but Reeve seemed unconcerned. "Not now," he called, his lips finding the curve of her neck. "The king commands your presence immediately," the voice insisted. Sylvie pulled back slightly. "Reeve, the king," she begun. "He'll wait," her husband murmured, reclaiming her mouth in a kiss. She broke away, breathless but determined. "You can't ask a king to wait." Reeve laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Are you worried about me?" He asked. "Of course I'm worried." She swatted his shoulder. "This isn't funny." "Reeve, be serious." His grin widened, and he looked absolutely delighted. "Fine," he conceded, stealing one more kiss. "I'll go, but I'll be back soon. Tonight. Another kiss, deeper this time. Don't go anywhere, as if I could," she murmured against his lips, the bond singing at his touch. Eventually. He disentangled himself from her in the sheets, dressing quickly while she watched from the bed. He paused at the door, his eyes lingering on her with such naked want that she blushed. "Tonight," he promised again, and then he was gone. Sylvie sighed, stretching languidly before finally rising to dress. She was just fastening her last buttons when another knock came at the door. Laughing, she moved to answer it. "What did you forget this time?" she called, swinging the door open with a smile. The smile froze on her face. It wasn't Reeve. Elaine stood on her doorstep, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. "Hi, Sylvie," she said, her voice strained. "I need to speak with you." Sylvie instinctively tried to close the door, but Elaine's foot wedged into the gap. "Please," she begged, "just hear me out." Against her better judgment. Sylvie relented, stepping back to allow her entry. "Talk about what?" she asked, crossing her arms defensively. "About how you and Edmund were in love, and failed to tell me." Elaine's chin lifted. A flash of defiance in her tear-filled eyes. "You can't fault me for falling in love." "I'm not," Sylvie retorted. "I'm angry you didn't tell me. Why act like nothing was going on? Why let me continue planning a wedding to a man who was in love with you? You know why," Elaine's voice hardened. "Because while your darling father adopted me, he failed to put me in his will. I'm left with nothing. Well, I didn't know that at the time." "Elaine," Sylvie replied, "because you didn't check." Elaine shot back. "Because you never had to worry about things like this. Did you?" Shame and anger warred within Sylvie, and you didn't think to just ask for my help. She said, "I would have given it to you. Elaine, you didn't have to lie. To humiliate me." Elaine's composure cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You're right. I'm sorry." She reached out, her fingers brushing Sylvie's arm. Immediately. Elaine's thoughts flooded into Sylvie's mind. Wait till your husband kicks you out when he finds you haven't inherited. You'll know humiliation then. Sylvie recoiled from the touch, the bitterness in Elaine's thoughts startling in its intensity. "First of all," she said coldly, "not only did I inherit, but second, my husband doesn't know and he loves me anyway." Elaine gasped, her eyes widening. Edmund was right. You can read minds. Her expression shifted from shock to calculation. "And you do have the money." she added. Sylvie realized she'd been baited into revealing both her ability and her financial status. Elaine's tears dried with suspicious quickness. "Sylvie, please," Elaine's tone turned pleading again. "Edmund and I need that money. You owe me this. I'm your sister. Look where I live." Sylvie gestured around the modest cabin. "It's hard, yes, but there's joy to be found here. Money isn't everything. Easy for you to say." Elaine's voice turned bitter again. "If you don't give me what I'm due, I'll tell your husband how you lied and hid your fortune from him." She stepped closer, her eyes hard. "Either he'll hate you for lying, or he'll show his true colors. Either way, you'll lose him." The threat struck Sylvie's deepest fear. She and Reeve had only just found each other. Their relationship was still so new, so fragile. What if Elaine was right? What if learning about her deception shattered the trust they'd begun to build? "Fine," she said quietly. "Half of it. I'll meet with you and sign the necessary papers." "Today," Elaine said firmly. "I've already sent for your financial advisor. He'll meet us at the old mill by the river at sundown." Sylvie nodded stiffly. "I'll be there," after Elaine left. Sylvie paced the cabin, her mind racing. She'd have to tell Reeve the truth eventually, but not yet. Not when they'd just found their way to each other. She needed time to find the right words, to explain why she'd lied. The hours crawled by. As the sun began its descent, she prepared to leave, hoping Reeve would stay occupied at the palace until after she returned. She had just wrapped her cloak around her shoulders when the door opened. Her husband stood there, his face alight with the same joy that had been there when he left. But his smile faltered slightly as he took in her cloaked form. "Going somewhere?" He asked. Yes," she stammered, mind racing for a plausible excuse. "One of the village women needs help with her sick child." His head tilted slightly. "Which woman?" He asked. The miller's wife." Sylvie improvised. "The miller doesn't have a wife," Reeve said, his voice carefully neutral. "Or children. I meant the blacksmith's wife." Sylvie fumbled. "I get confused with all these new neighbors." Reeve studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. The joy that had been radiating through their bond dimmed, replaced by a cautious wariness. "Are you being honest with me?" "Sylvie," he asked. She swallowed hard, guilt pressing against her ribs. "Well, what about you?" she countered, seizing the opportunity to deflect. "Will you tell me what you're really doing at the palace?" His expression closed off, the warmth in his eyes cooling. "Be careful," was all he said. The walk to the old mill was torturous, her mind replaying their exchange. The bond felt muted, dampened by the distance and the lies between them. She'd fix this, she promised herself. Once she dealt with Elaine, she'd return home and tell Reeve everything. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the abandoned building. The perfect place for a clandestine meeting. Or a trap. "Let's get this over with," she thought, approaching. To her surprise, it was Edmund who stepped out from behind a pillar, not Elaine. His expression was unexpectedly gentle. "Sylvie," he said, moving toward her. "There's another option. You could keep your entire fortune. All of it." "Where's Elaine?" she replied, wary. "She sent me to handle the negotiations," Edmund said. "As for keeping your fortune, ask for a divorce. Return to me. I made a mistake. Sylvie, I do care for you." She tried to pull her hand away, but he held fast, his thoughts flooding her mind. "I'd rather have the entire fortune than Elaine if I have to. I'll sign whatever she wants to reassure her." The naked calculation in his thoughts revolted her. "Let go of me," she said. Surprisingly, he complied, his expression still earnest. "Think about it. Sylvie, you're living in squalor. You deserve better. Better like you. She asked. She turned to the advisor, who had watched the exchange with obvious discomfort. Draw up the papers. Elaine gets half of everything. I don't care what she does with it or who she gives it to. She shot a pointed look at Edmund. But know this, the moment you burn through it, there won't be more. This is all you get from me. Without waiting for a response, she turned and left, desperate to return home. To Reeve. To explain everything and hope he understood. To finally be honest with each other. But when she reached the cabin, breathless from her hurried pace, she found it dark and empty. He was gone. Chapter 7. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows, and Sylvie hadn't slept. She'd spent the night alternating between pacing the small space and sitting by the door, waiting for the sound of Reeve's footsteps. He hadn't returned. The bond felt strange, not broken, but muted, as though obscured by fog. She could still sense him, somewhere distant, but his emotions were indecipherable. Was he angry? Hurt, she pressed her hand to her chest, where the ache of the bond had settled like a stone. What a fool she'd been. She should have told him the truth from the beginning. About her fortune, about everything. Instead, she'd allowed fear to guide her actions, and now, a knock at the door sent her scrambling to answer it, hope surging through her veins. But it wasn't Reeve. A palace guard stood on her doorstep, expression formal. My husband isn't home, Sylvie informed him. I'm here for you, my lady, the guard replied. King Caspian requests your presence at the palace. Sylvie blinked. Why would the king want to see me? The guard's expression remained impassive. I wasn't informed of the reason, he said. Sylvie changed into her cleanest dress, still patched and faded, but the best she had. As the guard escorted her toward a carriage, her mind raced with possibilities. Had something happened to Reeve? Was he hurt? Arrested, the palace loomed before them, gleaming white against the afternoon sky. Finally, they reached the throne room. Massive doors swung open to reveal a cavernous chamber filled with nobles and courtiers. At the far end, seated upon an ornate throne, was the masked figure of King Caspian. Even from a distance, the intricate silver and onyx mask was unmistakable. Lady Sylvie of the Eastern Provinces, the guard announced, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent room. All eyes turned to her as she walked the seemingly endless distance to the throne. When she reached the dais, she sank into a deep curtsy, head bowed. Your Majesty. Rise, Lady Sylvie. The king's voice was resonant, carrying easily through the large chamber. She rose, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. You summoned me. Your Majesty? Indeed, the king said. I have a proposition for you. Confusion flickered through her. What could the king possibly want from her? I've been informed by your sister of a rather remarkable ability you possess, the king continued. The ability to read minds. Sylvie's head snapped up in shock, her eyes meeting the king's through the eyeholes of his mask. So Elaine had told him. Had she told the entire court as well? Is this true? The king pressed. There was no point in lying. Not here. Not now. Yes, Your Majesty, she confirmed with a small nod. A murmur rippled through the assembled courtiers. The king rose from his throne. Such an ability is invaluable, he said. It would be a tremendous asset to a ruler, to know the true thoughts and intentions of allies and enemies alike. He paused, then continued with a formality that sent a chill down her spine. Lady Sylvie, I would like to take you as my queen. Gasps and whispers erupted throughout the throne room. Sylvie stood frozen, unable to comprehend what she'd just heard. Your Majesty, I'm already mated, she stammered once she found her voice. The king waved a dismissive hand. I am ruler of these lands. If I wish it, your current bond can be annulled. I will not force you, the king added, his tone softening slightly. The choice is ultimately yours. But consider what I offer. A position of honor and power, wealth beyond imagining, the chance to use your unique gift to help an entire kingdom. What does your beggar husband offer that could possibly compare? The courtiers watched, breathless with anticipation, waiting for her response. Your Majesty honors me beyond measure, she said carefully, but I must decline. The king's eyes narrowed behind his mask. You would refuse a king for a beggar. Sylvie lifted her chin, finding strength in the certainty of her heart. He is no beggar in my eyes. He is my husband and my mate. He has been your husband for merely 2 months, the king countered. 2 months during which you have lived in poverty, tending roofs and pig pens, never having enough to eat. You would give up a kingdom for this life. I would give up a kingdom for a life with the man I love, she said. A hush fell over the throne room. The king remained motionless for a long moment, his eyes searching hers through the mask. Then, just as he was about to respond, a commanding voice cut through the silence. Enough. Every head turned toward the sound. At the entrance to the throne room stood another man, dressed in royal finery, wearing an identical mask to the king's. He strode forward with purpose, his bearing regal and confident. Confusion rippled through the court as the 2 masked figures faced each other. Then, to Sylvie's astonishment, the king who had been speaking to her removed his mask, revealing the face of an older man she didn't recognize, and to everyone's stupor. He knelt in front of the newcomer. Your Majesty, he said, before announcing to the court, bow before your true king. Sylvie sank into a deep curtsy along with everyone else, her mind reeling. The masked king approached where she knelt, his steps measured and deliberate. He stopped directly before her, then knelt down to her level. Look at me, Sylvie, he said softly, slowly. She raised her head. Through the eye holes of the mask, she met his gaze, gray eyes that she knew, that she'd gazed into countless times over the past months. With trembling hands, he removed the mask. Reeve's face was revealed, his expression a mixture of apprehension and hope. Sylvie gasped. The courtier's exclamations faded to a distant hum as she stared at the man before her. Her husband, her mate, her king. You, she whispered, unable to form any other word. Reeve. King Caspian raised a hand, silencing the court before returning his attention to Sylvie. I'm sorry, he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. I should have told you sooner. The mask allows me to move among my court, and people unrecognized, to learn the true nature of those around me. Sometimes as a courtier, sometimes, he smiled ruefully, sometimes, even as a beggar. Sylvie stared at him, still unable to process the magnitude of his deception. Seeing her shocked silence, his smile faded. I've been able to read minds since birth, he continued, his voice softening further. It's an isolating ability. As you've learned, I was always well aware that if people were kind to me, it was because they wanted something, or because I was their prince, then their king. They loved me, not for myself, but for what I could give them. The words resonated within her, echoing her own experience since gaining the ability, the constant doubt, the inability to trust. His hands, those familiar hands that had touched her so tenderly, reached for hers. When you kissed me that day, a beggar you'd just met. I dared to hope you might be different. I wanted to know if you could love me without a crown, without wealth, without status, if you could love me as just a man. The full magnitude of his deception crashed over Sylvie. Months of deliberate lies, calculated tests, without conscious thought, propelled by shock and betrayal. She raised her hand and slapped him hard. Reeves' head snapped to the side with the force of the blow, but when he turned back to her, he was smiling ruefully. "I deserved that," he admitted. She slapped him again, tears burning in her eyes. He accepted the second blow without protest, but caught her wrist gently before she could think of delivering a third. "You were testing me too. Sylvie," he said quietly, "you know what it's like hearing others' thoughts. All the dark, selfish impulses that cross even the kindest minds. How rare it is to hear genuine, selfless love." The truth of his words struck her to the core. They had been mirrors of each other, both gifted or cursed, with the same ability. Both desperate to find someone who would love them truly. Not for what they possessed. "I can't read your mind," he said, his thumb brushing gently over her pulse point. "You're the only person whose thoughts remain hidden from me. I believe it's because you were meant to be mine. Just as I can't read your thoughts, you can't read mine." Tears spilled down her cheeks as the full weight of their shared loneliness, their parallel journeys, settled over her. All this time, they had been testing each other, pushing each other away out of fear, when what they both truly wanted was to be drawn closer. Reeve knelt before her again, heedless of the watching court, his royal dignity. "Can you forgive me? Sylvie," he asked, his voice breaking slightly. "Can you trust me again? Will you be my queen? Not because of my crown, but because we were made for each other." She looked down at him, this powerful king on his knees before her, his eyes reflecting the same vulnerability, the same hope she felt in her own heart. "Yes," she whispered, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Yes, I forgive you, if you'll forgive me." Joy blazed across his face, more brilliant than any crown. Reeve rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of truth between them. The court eruption in cheers. But Sylvie heard nothing beyond the beating of her mate's heart against her own, and the sweet, perfect silence of his thoughts. A silence that meant she would have to trust in his love, and he in hers from now on, the way it was always meant to be. Thank you so much for listening to my new story. I really hope you enjoyed it.